Fans, if you're into sports betting, BetOnline is where you should go to win money today. Whether it's live bets during games or futures for who you think's going to win the championship, BetOnline has all the latest odds, news, and information for all of your online sports betting needs. Visit the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. So before the next big game, head on over to BetOnline and start playing today. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Welcome again, everybody, and thanks so much for checking us out. On this episode, Mark, we have a former player who carved out his own niche, all while having a famous father, and Gary Matthews Jr. continues to reach out to the younger generation, much like he did when he was a big leaguer.
Mike, it's interesting, too. In these podcasts, we get people that grew up in the game of baseball, and their stories are way beyond what their career was. 12-year career for Gary Matthews Jr., but also Little Sarge had the influence of what his dad's teammates were, and these stories are going to be so good. I can't wait to hear them.
Gary, it's great to have you with us. 12 seasons in the big leagues, 7 different teams. You make an all-star team. Really nice career you're able to put together. But when you look back on it all, what do you consider to be your signature moment on the field?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the kind words. But obviously, you know, it's funny. You mentioned 12 years and another four years in the minor leagues, and you throw in my father's career, and I probably, when I retired, had been in the game for 37 years. And you have one moment, you know, if you're lucky, that people remember you mostly for. And I'll tell you what, I didn't get a chance to win a championship, but the big catch that I made in Texas and robbing Mike Lamb of a home run, that's not a bad second for a memory that fans remember you for, and continuously come up to me, or they text me about, or, they reach out on social media with their post, and baseball fans are the best, and it is pretty special to have a moment that fans continue to remember.
Gary, let's talk about that moment because it's one of those things that you're watching highlights and everyone's so excited about seeing highlights every single night, whatever platform you're watching. But I couldn't see it enough. I was like rewinding, see it again. And obviously you think of athleticism that sticks out, but the monumentous occasion of what it was, because Mike Lamb was going for the cycle. And you prevented that. Talk about the scenario of what went through and your thought process with that type of play.
Yeah, so Mike Lamb was a home run away from the cycle, but some of the details that fans and players may not know is that he had already hit 2 home runs in the series. So he came in along with the Houston Astros, really hitting well, was on fire and really locked in. And I think Brian Corey was on the mound, hung a changeup out over the plate. When a player is hitting well, when a hitter's on fire, you're kind of, ready for some action, if you will, probably playing a little bit deeper than I might normally play on him because he had been driving the ball extremely well. And, it's a day game in Houston, Texas, in Arlington. So, it goes during the day a little bit. And sometimes when it gets in that jet stream, it can get up and go. And so Brian Corey hung a changeup. He hit it extremely well. I knew it was probably going out of the park, but he hit it so high, I knew I was going to have a little bit of time to try and time it. And, the stars aligned, and took a couple peeks. You check the wall, and here you go, run up the wall, and comes down into my glove. And I was so high up, I was higher up than I anticipated, that, you get that high up over the wall and you're like, whoa, you're ready for the ground to be there, and the ground wasn't there. You realize how high you've gotten up. And you come down with the ball in my glove, and you try and keep your composure. Back then, when the game was different, there's a lot of bat flipping and chest pounding that goes on now. But, you just robbed the guy of a home run, so you want to keep your composure and show a little respect, right? But in your mind, you're like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe I just pulled that out. Unbelievable.
Yeah, when you think about Gary, I mean, I think a lot of people have seen online, and that, we're in the age of YouTube, and you see the Japanese catch where the guy's got his foot on the top of the wall, and making the catch. Those things are fascinating to me. I go back in the day, and by no means am I talking about defense with my type of game, but Davey Lopes, our outfield instructor, used to say, you know what, you do your drills, and then he would hit fungos right at the wall, so you would get a little more comfortable with that. This type of play, though, you're typically jumping up and trying to put your glove over the wall. This aspect is totally different because you have to position yourself where you're putting that your cleat into the wall, and then you're trying to get a little bit more height. What was the thought process of how you reacted, or was it just a natural reaction of I knew where I was on the field because it's my home field? But what was that reaction to you?
Yeah, you just mentioned Davey Lopes, one of the best, right? Like he was one of those guys that really help prepare the outfielders, and especially for young guys, Mike Darr and I, to get used to that kind of soft, baggy wall that we had in Qualcomm when I first came up. This wall in Texas, much kind of more modern wall where it was hard, still padded so you can get some grip, running into the wall. You got a running start and you can kind of climb up this wall. And so I had a fair idea I was going to be able to take a shot at and climb the wall. It was so high, I knew I was going to have to climb it. The most difficult part is probably not only timing your highest point to where the ball is coming down, but making sure that you pick the right spot on the wall to climb up, right? Like if I pick the right spot on the wall, wrong spot on the wall to climb up, I could be maybe, 2 or 3 feet to my right, 2 or 3 feet to my left. And so when I say that the stars aligned, it literally, no doubt there's athleticism involved and timing involved, but I picked the right spot on the wall to climb up, and, everything worked out perfect. A foot in either direction, right? Picking the wrong spot on the wall to climb up, and I don't catch it.
I appreciate the humility, but to be honest with you, that was like the defensive equivalent of the Hail Mary. Right. You were going, and especially, you're talking middle of the year. Wasn't like you were in a playoff situation. The adrenaline you brought to the table when a lot of guys would have like, that one's gone, and kind of maybe giving it half the effort. It was really remarkable, and I would implore, that's a strong word, I know, but I'd implore our listeners to get over to YouTube and check this thing out, the Gary Matthews Jr. catch in 2006. It's unbelievable.
It's a good one. When I was a kid, I can't remember what the specific year, but it had to be between 77 and 79. My dad was playing for the Braves in Fulton County Stadium. Dave Kingman was playing for the Cubs, and Dave Kingman was big home run hitter at the time, probably 6'6", put together, big boy, right? And maybe the Mike Stanton of his time. And Dave Kingman hit a deep drive to right center field. My dad ran back, timed it great, and made this unbelievable catch, really similar to mine. And I happened to be on summer vacation at the time. So I was at the game for that catch. And, that catch, it never left my mind. Obviously, my dad's best catch of his career. And, who would have thought, you fast forward to 2006, and I make this unbelievable catch. And my son had to be maybe 8 or 9 at the time, and happened to be on summer vacation and was at the game when I made that catch, robbing Mike Lamb of the home run. And I remember going home that night and remembering my father's catch. My father and I talked about it and talked about how I was sitting in the stands in the family section when he made that catch, and how ironic it is and special it was that my son was there to see the same thing. It was unbelievable. My son watched ESPN all night. That night. I had to pry him off of ESPN because he kept watching the catch, wanted to see the catch on the highlights on the next show, and peeled him off of the TV screen probably around 12 a.m. so he could finally get to bed.
He and myself included too. I was watching it like nonstop too, man. I was like, I was a proud fan too that night. What was your dad's reaction when you talked to him? What was that like?
Oh, he was almost in disbelief. He said, "It looked like you had it timed up really well." He's like, "Did you really have it timed up, or did you get lucky?" He wanted to know. He's like, "Did you get lucky, or did you really have it timed up?" I was like, "Dad, I got a great look at it because he hit it so high, right? So I had time if he hits that ball on a line or a little bit lower, I probably don't have time to get back there. But I told my dad, I said, he hit it so high. It was a hanging changeup. He hit it so high. I kind of had plenty of time to get back there, and if you watch it, I'm hightailing it back there.
Yeah.
It seemed to be just about, perfect, where it was just high enough where I had enough time to get back, time it to climb up the wall. But if it's hitting lower, I probably don't have the time to get back on it.
You ever talk to Mike Lamb about it? I'm sure he was less than thrilled.
Ironic. I was just so I live in Orange County, and I was playing golf at Coto de Casa. And I ran into a friend of his at the club who gave me his phone number. So I spoke with Mike. We talked about the catch and how we seem to be, linked, not only during the era that we played in by playing during the same time, but this amazing moment through this catch. And so we had a conversation over the phone about it probably a month ago. And, we just talked about how special it is that people remember us for this moment. That's positive and amazing, right? It's such a small moment when you think about all the work players put into the game to get to the league, to prepare to play and to stick around, hopefully 10 or 12 years if you can, some players 15 years. But it seems to be like these small moments that fans connect with and remember you for, and how special it is that fans still remember us for that moment.
Go ahead and check it out, folks. If you're listening, YouTube, it's an unbelievable play. Gary Matthews Jr. Back in 2006. You mentioned a moment ago, Gary, about the time that it takes to get to the big leagues, never mind have these particular moments. But you got the call up in 1999 with the Padres. You were a 13th round pick a handful of years earlier, 93. What do you remember about getting the call? Who told you? What are the stories around that?
I think I was in AAA. I think it had to be in June. And I really hadn't gotten off to the best start in AAA that year. That year before, I played in AA and was off to an amazing start, hitting around 400, and had heard some whispers about me possibly coming up straight from AA. But unfortunately I got hurt, and then so the next year I missed probably half of that AA season. So they promoted me, moved up to AAA, but I really needed a little bit more seasoning. I was probably missing, at least a half a year to a year of experience in playing at the higher levels. But nonetheless, I got the call. I got off to a slow start, but got rolling and got things together. I think there were a couple injuries in the big leagues sometime in June. Ruben Rivera might have went down, and I think maybe one of the infielders went down. And so Dave Newhan and I got the call together. Dave Newhan was a middle infielder, second baseman with a kind of a left-handed bat, had some pop, could play some defense a little bit. We both got called up together that day and hopped on the plane. I think Mike Ramsey was a manager at the time, and Mike had managed me in AA in the previous year. We had won a championship in the Southern League. And so to get that call from, Ramser, we called him, from Mike Ramsey was pretty special for me.
And who was the first call you made after you found out the news?
Oh man, probably my dad. I probably called my dad. When you think about, for me, I took so much pride in getting to the major leagues, how I approached the game. It really meant something to me to be literally and figuratively following in my father's footsteps. I took a lot of pride in the way that I approached the game, the way that I played it. I knew that I wasn't playing for my own legacy. I was playing for my father's legacy as well. It was something that I'm continue to be proud of to this day. But I would never want to do anything that was going to embarrass his legacy, anything that was going to tarnish it in any way. However, big his legacy in this game is, it was something that I'm still to this day very prideful about. And so I played the game the right way. I prepared and played hard. And so to make that call to him and tell him that I finally made it, right? That I've made it on my own accord through hard work, dedication, perseverance, and literally, as you know, blood, sweat, and tears. It's such a proud moment
And Gary, you think about it too from our listeners' perspective. The first thought is how much of that pressure of coming up after a successful career that your dad had, those pressures are real. How did you handle those?
Oh, for sure. They are 100% real. And one of the really cool things my parents did for me at a very young age was they separated family from the game. Uh, the baseball was my father's job. My mother explained, like, listen, this is the family business, but the most important thing is family. And so the game is, look, there's fame, there's money, there's all this attention, and it's a blessing to be involved with it. But the realest things we have are each other and our family and that relationship with family. And so when I started playing, my parents made it clear that there is the Gary Matthews Jr., the person and family member, son, brother, right, friend, and there is Gary Matthews Jr., the player. And while this, playing the game is amazing, it's going to create all these great experiences for you. Your dreams are literally coming true. There will come a time when this ends. And so when your parents kind of set that up for you at 10 or 12 years old, it gives you, it kind of gives you an opportunity to see that, like, look, this is great, but at some point this is going to end. And fortunately for me, I remember when my father retired. And so, without going off the deep end, I really want to take the fans kind of behind the scenes. When my father retired, probably 6 months into retirement, he shared with me how difficult it was, how you go from everywhere you go, everyone knows your name and people cheering. And, 6 months into retirement, he was really missing the game and realizing that, his career was over and coming to that realization. And so it was difficult for him. And I was 14 when we were having this conversation. And I'm so thankful for it that my father was open and honest. And so my father decided to go see a therapist and work with a therapist and talk about his feelings, talk about why it was difficult, talk about how retirement was making him feel, and to deal with all of those feelings. And so after hearing that at 14, I'll never forget it. I was heading off to school one morning when he pulled me into the office and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something before you go to school." And so we had this really intimate conversation. And so after that conversation, I understood that, okay, well, at some point, when I'm ready to retire, when I feel like maybe I'm towards the end, I'll sit down with a therapist also, right? Like I saw it no different than a hitting coach, right? Than a Merv Retman,
right?
Or a Rudy Jaramillo, right? A pitching coach, right? No different. And so a trainer that we would use during the off season, a speed coach. And so as I kind of got further along in my career around 37 and I started to have those feelings like maybe it's time to retire. Maybe I think I'm ready to move on to the next thing. I did the same thing that my father had told me all those years ago, 20 something, years previous when I was 14 years old. And so I utilized, those skills that my father taught me. And I saw no shame in it, but it is such a help. And that's something that, we don't talk about enough, that how difficult the transition of retiring is, whether, whatever it is, right? Whether you're a fireman, whether you're a physician, there is a transition that takes place when you get ready to leave that line of work.
I think adding to that quirk, Gary, is the fact that when you retire as a player, in real life, you're a real young man still, but you're closing the book on a chapter of life that a lot of men and women out there don't really close until they're, say, 60s, 70s, in that range. So it's a whole different dynamic because you have a lot of life still ahead of you. Let me ask you this. You brought up the notion that you had all of these tools, mental skills that a lot of players don't have. You had the father in the big leagues. You had the retirement speech. You worked your way up. You thought you're up in the big leagues maybe a little bit earlier than you expected. You're 24 years old. I want to stay in that 1999 rookie season because you walk into that clubhouse armed with all that knowledge. Yet you're going into a clubhouse that had just gone to the World Series the year prior with Bruce Bochy and his Padres. You have a big experience lineup. You still have Tony Gwynn Jr., the future, or Tony Gwynn Sr., I should say, the future Hall of Famer in that clubhouse. What was that like for you, even though you had some tools young guys don't typically have in those scenarios?
Yeah, to be really honest with you, I was really, really comfortable around these guys. And, it was a really, really good team, right? Like a great team. And when I signed in 94, I'll kind of give you a little bit of background. But I was drafted in 93 and I opted to go back to college. So I felt that could be better. And I went back to college for my sophomore year and had anticipation of going back in the draft, played really well that season, became a junior college All-American, and was set to go back in the draft. And before the draft, my dad approached me and said, listen, I've been thinking about the draft coming up. I know San Diego owns your rights up until 24 hours before the next draft. My dad thought that I should sign with the Padres because this organization, these players who were in the big leagues at the time were in their prime. My father figured 4 years from now, when you are, knocking on the door to the major leagues, these guys will be almost on their way out. And you can come up in San Diego in a smaller market where there's not a lot of pressure. And as a young guy, 19, sophomore in college, I'm just coming out of being an All-American. So I was ready to, cash in and get some money in the draft. And so my dad said, listen, I think this is the right move. And so, trust what I'm telling you. Do you trust what I'm telling you? I said, absolutely, yeah. I said, okay, so we're going to sign with the Padres. And so I think I signed for $60,000. And, this was around the time where, guys were starting to get, $1 million contracts. And, certainly I would have been somewhere in line for somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million in the draft. But just as my dad predicted, when I got to the major leagues, some of these guys were getting older, but still, in their prime, right? Because at the time, veteran players were playing longer, but my father was right. And so when I got to the major leagues, there were the Tony Gwynns, the Ricky Henderson, Reggie Sanders, Greg Vaughn, Mark Sweeney, right? Like Andy Ashby. These guys were Dario Veras, right? You remember Dario?
Right.
When you talk about, a group that was tailor-made for a young guy like me, look, I believed in my talent, but I knew that I was to come in and be humble, to listen, to work hard, and to ask questions if need be. And my father was 100% spot on. There couldn't have been a better organization for me to enter the big leagues in. From top to bottom. When you think about that ownership group of Larry Lucchino, John Moores, and then it trickles down to the Tony Gwynns and Bruce Bochy, Merv Retman and the staff, right? Tim Flannery. The organization was top notch, and it trickled down to all of the players. And, when I got to the major leagues, Tony Gwynn, I can't remember our clubhouse manager's name, but Tony Gwynn had him clean out one of his two lockers, right? Tony Gwynn had a locker for his gear,
right?
If you remember.
Yep.
And then, Hall of Fame, superstar, he had a locker for his fan mail, right?
Right.
He had those two lockers. And so they cleaned out his fan mail locker and they put me in his extra locker so I could watch how it was done, to see how a modern and generational great performs and prepares every day. And Mark, that as far as preparation and planning, very few are matched by the great Tony Gwynn. He was amazing. And so to literally get to the major leagues and be taken under his wing and watch how he performs, how he prepares, his level of confidence, how he interacts with the media, how he interacts with teammates. It couldn't have been a better spot for me to land. Now, look, if you see one downside, the downside would have been that, this team was locked and loaded, right? Coming out
Yep.
of a World Series in '98, so I was getting no playing time. I was coffee boy and defensive replacement for for my first couple of years there, but I have no regrets. I mean, every young guy would love to come up and play right away, but to learn from such an experienced and really good team and from a top-notch organization, it really set the tone for the rest of my career. I'm thankful today for my father kind of guiding me in that direction when, most kids and most parents would just be going for the money. My dad really thought about the organization that I was going to play for, and he thought about the city that I would be starting my career in.
Gary, I thought it'd be nice to paint the picture for our listeners, realizing too, you talked about the locker and presenting where Tony Gwynn's locker was. It was right next to the film room, the video room.
Yeah.
So you next to him, I mean, that was almost like that was royalty over there in the corner, which really represents what he thought of you. And why I say that is that he was quoted as saying, and put more pressure on you, is that you were designated to replace him when he was finished. That's a daunting statement coming from a Hall of Famer, a guy that was a wizard with the bat. How did that make you feel? Because hearing it from another player, I'm like, wow. I mean, sometimes that's the general manager, but I think Tony Gwynn's probably a little higher on that hierarchy to be able to make that statement.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's so flattering to hear that, right? Like, I really made sure that I didn't read the papers then. I didn't even watch a whole lot of games, right? Like, I really wanted to. This game is hard enough. And to add the pressure of replacing someone who is unreplaceable, who replaces the great Tony Gwynn. And so, listen, I would hear whispers of that, but I wasn't mistaken. No one replaces Tony Gwynn. And so, and having the comparisons from my father's career, I understood who I was, not only as a person, but as a player. And even at a young age, I understood my strengths. I understood my weaknesses. I was honest with myself about what I needed to improve on. I think the difficult part was going to be how to continue to develop and how to figure out how to improve on those weaknesses and apply the things that we were being taught as hitters and apply it to what I do best. That is a thing that really takes a while for young guys, especially when you're trying to make that adjustment at the major league level. It's still the hardest thing in a game to do. The hardest thing in sports, in my opinion, is to hit a round object, a round ball with a round bat. And so, I took it all in stride, but I wanted to soak it all in and learn as much as I could from everyone, not only Tony, but everyone, right? Like, I really listened. I watched a lot, and having grown up in the 70s and 80s and a really strong time during baseball, I was just used to watching some of the greats and trying to pick certain things that some of my favorite players did and kind of apply it to what I do, or copy these players when I was a kid, and so all of that work and all of that information that you take in as you get older and at this time 24, I'm able to process and figure out how all of these things apply to what I do well.
Gary,
but to answer your question, no one replaces Tony.
Right. No one does, but I thought it was really cool the way he presented you and had so much trust in you. This podcast is all about firsts, and we don't want to get away from that because these are moments that you'll never forget. What do you remember about your first hit and your first home run? Because those are special moments.
Oh, wow. So my first major league hit is actually sitting on the wall behind us somewhere in one of these balls. My first hit was in San Diego in Qualcomm. I started, I think, the Friday night game, and then I might have had the second game off, and then I played the day game. I was 0 for my first 2 games. And look, I don't care what anyone says. You can be as prepared for the major leagues as anyone's ever been prepared for it. But getting to the major leagues on your own and that first single at bat, there were some nerves, right? Like I remember, even driving into the stadium, like I was fine, right? I'd spent so much time in that stadium. It was Jack Murphy Stadium.
Yep.
When I came up, right? But we lived in Los Angeles. So we would make the drive up with the family, watch my dad play in different series throughout his career. So I had spent so many nights and so many days in that stadium and was familiar with it. And I was familiar with the team. I'd been on the roster for 2 years at that point. But when you step into the box and you hear your name called for that first time, those nerves kick in and your knees shaking a little bit. You got to step out of the box and compose yourself. You're like, whoa, what is going on here? Like I've done this, hundreds of thousands of times. And, but I think it's the adrenaline and the excitement of knowing that you're there and that you've earned it. And it was a day game and it was a line drive off of a, sinker that was up, 2-seam fastball off of, oh gosh, I should remember this.
Freddie Garcia.
Look back here. Yep, there it is. Freddie Garcia.
Yeah.
Freddie Garcia, right-hander, kind of sinker ball pitcher, but kind of long and lanky. He got a fastball up out over the plate, and I hit a line drive, clean single to center field. And, it's always nice to get a hard, clean hit for your first major league hit, but it took me 2 nights to get it. I remember, something else I remember. I remember rounding first base and going back to first base. And Tim Flannery was the first base coach at the time. I think he was the first base coach at the time. He shook my hand. He said, "Junior, congratulations. Great to see you here. First of many. Let's get to work."
Yeah.
First of like that you never forget, right? It's so special.
First of 1,056 of them, Gary. That's a lot of hitting, buddy.
1,056. It is. Listen, no one will ever accuse me of being Pete Rose, but to get over 1,000 is pretty special. And
you remember the first homer?
The first homer, I think my first homer. Gosh, who was it off of? I should remember this. Don't tell me. Might have been off of Bruce Chen. Maybe.
That's
I think
exactly
I hit my first
right.
homer off of Bruce Chen, left-handed pitcher. I think it was in Atlanta. And I've got another great baseball story for you surrounding my first home run. So we are playing in Atlanta. And by this time, I think it's maybe a year later. I think I've been traded to Chicago by this point. And, the Padres were, debating. There wasn't going to be room for Mike Dar and I both, and they were debating. I was a little bit older. I think I was 2 years older than Mike. So they decided to keep Mike. Mike was coming off of a great year in AAA. And so I was traded that next spring in 2000. But talk about a dream come true to get traded to the Chicago Cubs and play for an organization that my father played for. And so that next year in 2000, we are playing in Atlanta. And I'm facing Bruce Chen and had a great at bat off of him. And I think it was a 3-2 count. I think he tried to get a fastball up. He was a fastball curveball guy and would throw the curveball off of the fastball. So he just thrown a curveball in the dirt, kind of loopy curveball. And then he threw the fastball off the top of it. And I caught him slipping dead center field. But fans would be excited to know that such a cool story. When my dad was a free agent and he signed his free agent deal with Atlanta in 77 or 78, my uncle, part of his contract was that the Braves would take my Uncle Henry and teach him photography. And even though my dad only stayed there for maybe 4 years, my Uncle Henry stayed on with TBS and not only, became a photographer, but became a videographer as well. And so he was a cameraman for TBS throughout my career. He just retired maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So my Uncle Henry was the home plate cameraman the night I hit my first home run.
Wow.
And so I have video of not only, me rounding second base after my first home run in the big leagues, but my Uncle Henry panning me on camera and pumping his fist at the same time. There's so many special memories that I've been fortunate to have in this game. There's countless. But, when I say that, literally my whole family has been involved in the game in some way, shape, or form, I'm not lying. My Uncle Henry, who's great. He not only filmed baseball, right, for the Braves, but he did WWF, he did IndyCar, NASCAR. He's just unbelievably talented, and he's sitting in Atlanta right now enjoying retirement.
What a special moment for Uncle Henry yourself. I mean, I love the fact that there's so many different layers to great stories, G. I mean, listen, this baseball game is so special in so many ways, and that's why we have so much fun with it. Speaking of photos, I think a big thing, and especially the way you were raised in the game, that rookie card had to be extra special for you. Did you collect cards when you were younger, and what do you remember about your first rookie card?
My brothers and I collected all the cards. And, you would probably remember this, Mark, but during spring training, that year's cards would come out. And so there would be, this was during the 70s, 80s. You came along a little later, but they would still release, the top cards and the Fleer cards. There'd be a stick of hard, stale bubblegum in there. My brothers and I would open these cards and try and find our favorite players. We'd trade them. And, because it was spring training, if one of those players happened to be coming in, we'd catch them. We'd go over to the visiting clubhouse when we had time, when batting practice was over, and nicely ask them to sign it. And, these players, they know who you are. So they're always, really sweet to you, really nice to you. But, there's nothing like opening up a pack and seeing your face on it for the first time. My relationship with the game in general is lifelong. And so I've got a really, really good card collection. I should probably go through it. My son was telling me maybe a couple months ago that, we should create some NFTs out of your baseball cards. We talked about technology before we got started here, and just, how it's evolved and connected the world. But, now baseball cards are creating value again. And so that seeing yourself on a card for the first time is pretty special for any player. And I think the first rookie card I saw was maybe an Upper Deck card, which was really cool because at the time, Upper Deck was like the Apple or the Tesla of baseball cards, right? And so to see yourself on that glossy, futuristic card, you literally felt like you made it, right?
Yeah. Did you have a particular card from maybe one of your dad's teammates? Because I could imagine two things. One, I'm thinking you grew up, obviously your dad was a hero of yours, but a lot of young players who grow up with fathers in the big leagues kind of gravitate towards some of the other players on these teams. You have any favorite teammates of your father's? Cards maybe of theirs you collected?
Wow. I mean, there's so many. Ozzie Smith was one of my favorite players, the Wizard of Oz. Vince Coleman, who was the stolen base champ for probably 5 or 6 years running and would steal 80 to 100 bases a year, was one of my favorites and was a great guy. And I've gotten a chance to know him as an adult and talk about amazing. But any player that played from the 70s and 80s and maybe early 90s were just unbelievable. Eric Davis was one of my favorites. Eric the Red, we called him. And, just there's so many. Pete Rose was one of my favorites. Dusty Baker, who's my godfather, was a favorite. There's so many. Jerry Royster, Rick Sutcliffe, Lee Smith. These guys were just, so good to me as a kid and had such a huge impact on me as a player. Just unbelievable. And I still have their cards today. And some of them I have, game used memorabilia. So I have a game used Ozzie Smith hat that he signed for me, bats from Ryan Sandberg, Gary Sheffield, just such a cool collection. And, one of the really nice things of having a father who played is my father collected a certain amount of memorabilia throughout the years. So I have balls signed by Bob Gibson, Roy Campanella,
Wow.
Negro League players like Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, right? Just amazing things. Really, really cool stuff.
All right, now that you piqued our interest, I'm going to put pressure on you. You got to have one thing that above all of the things. Now, we're lucky. We're seeing some of this behind you right now on the podcast, which, by the way, is available through video as well if you're interested. Is there one thing above all the pieces of memorabilia you have that is most important to you?
Oh, wow. There are so many really, really cool pieces that I have that I've been fortunate enough to acquire and collect over the years. But there's one piece that really, really stands out and is near and dear to my heart because it was given to my father. And I think it was right around my 36th or 37th birthday, sometime before I retired. My father then gifted it to me. And it is a Willie authentic game used for probably 3 or 4 years, Willie Mays glove.
Wow.
And as a center fielder, it doesn't get any better than owning a Willie Mays glove or maybe a Ken Griffey Jr. glove. Those two guys, iconic legends within the game. But when you think of Willie Mays, you think of the best catch that's ever made. And so to have one of his game-used gloves that was gifted from Willie to my father, who played with him in San Francisco when he was with the Giants, and my father gifted it to me years later, it's a pretty special piece, and for me, irreplaceable. And look, at the end of the day, these are just things, right? Like we all know, the most important things are our relationships and family and the moments that we share together. But if we're talking about memorabilia and that single, just unreplaceable piece, it doesn't get much better for me than a Willie Mays glove. And I would say a very close second is one of those black lacquered with pine tar on it, Pete Rose game used bat that I have. That is really, really special, really cool.
I think, the memories that this game brings us, and us being fortunate enough to be in the game where you meet people that really resonate, and obviously through all of these stories that you're telling us, the personalization that your dad woven in your aspect of your career, his career, is fascinating. I was telling a story to Mike the other day that when you spend enough time in this game, you meet people that make a huge impact on you. I have Jimmy Reese right here. He's one of them with the Angels. I said the story the other day, and I'll never forget it because you mentioned Ozzie Smith, one of my greatest teammates I've ever had. We're playing a playoff game, and all of a sudden, behind us, through all the reporters and everyone that was on the field, we were taking batting practice. He turns to me, and I felt someone was on the field that was bigger than the game. And I turn around, and it's the late, great Hank Aaron. And,
oh, wow.
And I started getting nervous, and I'm getting ready for batting practice. We're in the next group, and I was fortunate enough to be in Ozzie Smith's group. And I look at him, and he must have seen the reaction on my face. He said, "Have you ever met him?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Grab a ball and come with me." So I grabbed this baseball that's close to me, and I go over, and I was like a little kid in the candy store.
Yeah.
And, that interaction with him, I was nervous. I was excited. I had all of those emotions that you go through, and you say, this is royalty of baseball. And I love to hear your perspective on this, because meeting that situation, it'll never leave my mind. but you've had plenty of those situations. What is the one guy that you felt like you had to meet or you were afforded to meet that made the greatest impact of you?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question and a really good question. I've met so many influential players throughout my time, my experience in the game. And we're talking about, I was born in 74. So, growing up in San Francisco, having those years with the Giants, and then all the way, through my retirement. This is, 37 years in the game at that point when I retired. So, you mentioned Mr. Aaron. I've, known him since the early 70s when my father signed as a free agent. Mr. Aaron was was part of the contingency with the Braves that recruited my father to come there and talked about the benefits of playing for the organization and how they were rebuilding, but they wanted my father to be a part of it. And so I have had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Aaron on many occasions, but you talk about Ozzie Smith, some of the icons and Hall of Famers of the game. I was fortunate enough to meet a handful of Negro League players during my career. Early on in the minor leagues, I think I was with San Diego. There was a promotion going on one day, and the Rancho Cucamonga Quakes brought in Ted Double Duty Radcliffe. And, they called him Double Duty because he played a doubleheader, and I think he would catch one and pitch another.
Wow.
Which was why they called him Double Duty, but amazing. And so I didn't know what the Negro Leagues was until I was maybe 12 or 13. And I remember my father mentioning and hearing him in conversation. We were at the house and he was talking about how African Americans at a certain point weren't allowed to play the game. And at 12, I remember hearing this conversation. I remember thinking, huh? It never occurred to me. Never occurred to me, Mark. So I had no idea. And so my dad said, yeah, Junior, there was a time when Black players weren't allowed to play the game. And I asked him, my very next question was, well, where'd they play? And he said there was a league called the Negro Leagues, and they had their own league, and that's where they played. And my very next question after that was, well, who was the first? And that is where my father taught me about Jackie Robinson. And my father had a book, this huge coffee table book, and it was about the Negro Leagues. And so there were these beautiful sketches of all these different players, from James Cool Papa Bell to Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige. And so below these sketches, it would tell a little bit of a story about their career. And so when my father pulled out this book, that was my first experience of learning about the Negro Leagues, the history of the Negro Leagues, the talent that existed in the league, how it was a faster paced game, and how there were quite a few players that had the talent to play in the major leagues, but unfortunately were born at the wrong time and weren't able to play in the major leagues. And, look, I remember it giving me this kind of profound sadness about that there were these guys who had the talent to play the game but weren't allowed to play it. And so when I met players from the Negro Leagues later in my career, I was able to meet Buck O'Neil. And so, when you mention, a handful of players who just were mind-blowing to me, those two players, Buck O'Neil, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, those guys were just unreal. Because when I think about how much they loved the game and how much they still loved it, in spite of the racism that they experienced, it hadn't diminished their love and appreciation for the game. That had such an impact on me. It really, gave me perspective as a young man and gave me drive to think that, listen, if these guys could deal with everything that they dealt with throughout their career and still have the passion, the love, and dedication remain undiminished, certainly I can go out and give my best effort during these times and give my all, because there were certain people who just didn't have the opportunity. How could I not go out and give my all and be prepared and give my best effort after just meeting these men, right?
The history of the game, clearly extraordinary, but it's not lost on any of us just how deeply you emphasize its impact on your personal journey and what your father was able to bring in the way of knowledge and experience to you. When you're going through your own career, and you, like a lot of athletes, right, you're caught up in the moment, you're aware of history, but in the moment, you're worried about that next at bat, that next game, that next pitcher you're facing. It seems to all come together for you in that 2006 season. We opened the podcast talking about the catch, but it was really just a fraction of what you did that season, Gary. 313 average, 19 homers, 79 RBIs, and you make the All-Star team. What did that mean to you when you consider the historical context of you being an African-American player in this league, making the All-Star team, your dad's history in the game? What was that moment like for you?
You know, obviously a really special moment, right? A moment of pride and finally feeling like I arrived in 2006, but really, you know, that transition and matriculation, if you will, into finally, I guess, making good on the talent that I had, right? All the wealth of talent, that, you know, speed and switch hitting and having a little bit of power and being a really good defensive player. That transition as a hitter started to kind of bear some fruit in 2004. I think I'd been traded to Atlanta, signed with the Atlanta Braves. And I happened to be put into the same hitting group as Chipper Jones. And I was brought in, I was going to back up Andrew Jones. But I remember that spring training. In the group was Andrew Jones, Chipper Jones, and one other player. But Chipper Jones, another Hall of Fame talent, and I was the type of player who liked to watch other players and figure out what it is that they do to have the amount of consistency and success that they have. And so I remember watching Chipper Jones. He was around my size, 6'3", switch hitter, right? Bigger guy, long arms, but it had, you know, one of the greats of the game, just had an amazing career. And getting put in the same hitting group with him, I started to watch everything about him. And I started from the ground up watching him in the cage. And he had such a great tempo and slow tempo. And so, listen, in baseball, in order to really have bat speed, you know, we talk about having, you know, slow feet and quick hands. And Chipper Jones was the epitome of that. But I also noticed his toe hold. So when I'd walk into the batting cage after he had walked out, his toe hold, his location of his foot relative to home plate was so much closer than mine. Like it was literally maybe 6 inches closer. That's a large amount when we're talking about plate coverage. And so I kind of noticed that. And so I started tinkering after watching him for maybe 2.5, 3 weeks, tinkering with my location. And I opened up my stance a little bit. And so, you know, I toyed with this, with a version of copying Chipper Jones' open stance, but without the toe tap. I, you know, bring my hands back and then come close. But it gives the pitcher the perception that you're not as close to the plate as you are, right? But it also gives the hitter, you know, the opportunity to have, because you're a little bit more open, both eyes on the plate. And so, Mark, you'll understand this, like any adjustment you make, you know, when you start trying to make an adjustment during spring training, it doesn't work, right? Yeah. Like it was a mess. And long story short, I went out and probably hit 170. I was hitting 170, 180 during spring training, but I felt like I had way better plate coverage. I can see the ball better. I had better pitch recognition. And so I was going to stick with it. And I'll never forget this. My dad calls me one morning during spring training, late in spring training. And he says, "Hey, Junior, what's going on at the plate?" I said, "Dad, I know I'm hitting 180, but I actually feel good. I'm seeing the ball well. And, don't worry about it." He goes, "Well, listen, you better get your stuff together because you're making 1.3 million. They're not going to be paying you 1.3 million to be hitting 180 during spring training. I'll tell you that much." Right? So I said, "Dad, don't worry about it. I'll be fine. I got it under control. My swing feels good." Well, a week later, I got that tap on the shoulder. And they said, "Junior, Bobby Cox and John Sherholtz want to talk to you." And, when you get that message, that tap early in the morning in spring training, it's not going to be good. You've either been traded or you're about to be released. And so I ended up getting released. But I really, it was unfortunate because I just didn't have enough time to work out the timing of my new stance and swing that I kind of copied from Chipper Jones. But I ended up signing after I got released, maybe 4 or 5 days later. I signed with the Texas Rangers, and I was paired up with the great Rudy Jaramillo, who was our hitting coach in Texas. And so that adjustment that I made. Rudy liked it. I told him, how I felt about it. Rudy tinkered with it just a little bit, and I was off to the races. And this kind of gives you an idea of how amazing, life is and how amazing and how funny the game works sometimes. If I had figured out that swing a little earlier, I would have undoubtedly sat behind not Chipper Jones, but Andrew Jones in center field for the next 2 years. Andrew played almost every day. So I really wouldn't have got much playing time in those 2 years. But because my timing happened to not be good during spring training, and Dwayne Wise and Damon Hollins, who were a left-handed hitter and a right-handed hitter, were going off during spring training, Atlanta decided to save some money. And, I was probably making double what they were making together. And so they released me, but it worked out great because I ended up going to Texas and had the opportunity to work out the kinks a little bit in that swing with Rudy Jaramillo. And I was off to the races, which led to, some really solid years in 2004 and 2005. And then that big year in 2006, which, we were just speaking about, and how amazing it was to get to that point. That doesn't even happen without that release by Atlanta. And, those 2004 and 2005 with the Texas Rangers that led up to, all the talent and experience and, most importantly, opportunity coming together. So I had a chance to play. But to, make that all-star team in 2006 was just, the culmination of a lot of my dreams come true. I watched my father play in the All-Star game in 78. And so to make the team as, on my own, right, I had earned it and I had worked really hard because it hadn't been a smooth transition into the league. I had my ups and downs, and I had, some bumps and bruises along the way where, some releases, you get traded or you get sent down. It's all part of the game, but it certainly makes it really, really sweet when you get there and you have an amazing year like that. I had made plans on the All-Star break to go to Miami with my younger brother, Dustin. We were going to take a break, and I thought, hey, why don't we fly out to Miami for a break? Fly out there for a couple days. I think we might have been playing some interleague in Miami right after the break. So I thought, we'll take it to Miami, or maybe we were starting up in Tampa, something like that. But I got the call that, no, the plans have changed. You're going to be playing in Pittsburgh in the All-Star game. And what an experience to have my family there in Pittsburgh and to see some of those Pittsburgh great players there reconnect with some of the Dave Parkers and introduce them to my son who had, never met him at the time. What a great experience.
Well, you think about it, G. Your teammate gets the big hit against Trevor Hoffman, your former teammate.
Yeah.
That wins the game in Pittsburgh. Also, I want to mention, too, that early morning tap that you got in Atlanta. I think everyone that goes through this game ends up getting one of those taps or some bad news. And it formulates the rest of your career. And I think just taking you into that All-Star game experience, Rudy Jaramillo, so many different layers get you to a point where you go to the Angels, you're a Southern California guy, as you mentioned, and you sign a big contract with the Angels. That had to be a culmination of so many great things in your career to be able to do that and also go to 2 postseasons with the Angels. Speak to what that felt like to end your career like that.
Yeah, it was, it was a point in my life where I felt like I was ready to play in a bigger market. I was ready for the challenge. My goal was to win a World Series. And, look, I'd accomplished a lot to that up to that point, but playing in the American League West against the Angels, I mean, they were the creme de la creme of the American League West, and they gave us fits in Texas. And I thought they were really, really close to winning a World Series and winning a championship. And so I had, when it came down to it, 2 teams that I was debating on signing with. And one was the San Francisco Giants. The other was the LA Angels of Anaheim. And, I was so conflicted and torn. The money wasn't going to be the issue because the money was the same amount of years, same amount of money. But I made a decision to sign with LA because I thought they were closer to a World Series based on where their previous success, the organization, and where I thought they were headed. And I thought I was finally ready to go back home and play in California. So I was born in San Francisco, but when my dad signed a free agent deal, we moved back to LA. So I had really grown up in LA. And Mark, it's a different type of pressure when you're playing at home. The demands on your personal time, the expectation of playing well, and the expectation of playing and needing to win. And a championship, if it's not a championship, then you didn't accomplish your goals. But I was ready for that. I was 32 or 30, I think 32 when I signed the deal. So I was ready for that. Going to be 33. And, it just goes to show that you never know, because I signed with LA and we won the American League West 3 straight years, 7, 8, and 9. And, you talk about, we fell short of the ultimate goal, but the experience of playing in the playoffs and celebrating with men that you developed a genuine bond with and set goals with, it's really special. And, when I look back now, the experience has had such a huge impact on my life. The friendship that I've made here in Anaheim, I talk to Garrett Anderson probably a couple times a month. We golf together. Justin Spire, who is our setup guy, lives down the street. We still speak. And really ironic, I talked about having identical deals and my goal to win a World Series, but having identical deals from the Angels and from the San Francisco Giants. Well, the Giants went out and won, I think, 2 World Series titles during the 5 years of my deal. So, I will never dispute the importance and the impact that the relationship that I built here in LA and the opportunity to come back and play in front of my grandparents and family. My grandparents came to my games every night here with the Angels, and I'm forever grateful and thankful for that experience. But a World Series or 2 would be nice too. And certainly, I got that decision wrong as far as, who was closer to the title. And, all credit due to the San Francisco Giants, storied organization, and they went out and got it done.
It had traded to the Mets, and you play a little bit longer. You try again with the Reds. And when it's all said and done, there you are in your mid to late 30s, a young man in the real world, getting in your longer in the tooth years as a baseball player.
Yeah,
when did it occur to
sure.
you? When did it occur to you? What was that like? I know you talked about this early in the podcast about having some kind of mental planning going through conversations you'd had with your father. But sometimes, like they say, the end still comes suddenly. What was that like for you? How'd you know it was over?
I don't think it was so sudden for me. I finally got traded to New York, and it didn't work out there. I think Carlos Beltran was hurt, and they wanted me to kind of be a stopgap in case Angel Pagan wasn't ready. I, of course, like any veteran player, you want to go back to starting and being great. And, but sometimes the organization has their plans. And the truth is, as a player, 36, 37, we're not the player that we once were. And because as an athlete, you're always taught to believe and have the ultimate confidence and believing that I didn't get it done tonight, but tomorrow's the day. And you wholeheartedly believe that. Because of that, athletes are always the last to know that they don't have it anymore, right? Like it's just that it's not there, right? It's kind of like that old boxer, right, who kind of stays around a little bit too long, and he'll tell you after the fight in the interview that he still got it, and he swears that it's still there. He just had an off night, that he's going to go back and train even harder, and he'll be back to get it done. But eventually you realize that, it's not there. And so that transition, I was starting to feel it. And, to me, there's a beauty in retiring and coming to the realization that this part of your life is going to be no more. And I was ready for the transition mentally. I had tools in place to help me through that transition. And look, not everyone gets a chance to go out like Derek Jeter goes out, right? You play your whole career, win championships, have a storied career, Hall of Fame career, and go out on a game-winning hit. For me, I was playing with Cincinnati, so you alluded to me kind of giving it one more try. I was in AAA, and really, I just wanted to prove to myself that I still had it. I didn't want to end my career, hitting 180 or 200 in New York and have that be the memory. So I tried to ramp it up one more time. I went out. I think they wanted me to sign up for the rest of the season. I can't remember who the GM was at the time with the Reds, but I told him I'd sign up for a month. And if you didn't see what you needed to see, then, that'd be it. And so I went out, played really well. And, if you're a veteran player, you're hitting around 350, 340, and you've signed kind of like a month contract and they haven't called you up, you kind of know they've got some other plans. And so I finished out that month, and I had a couple of my buddies, a couple of my friends fly into Gwinnett, Georgia to watch me play, because I kind of felt like I was going to hang it up after that. I had a great series, and I remember making a really good catch in maybe one of the day games before my last game. And, it was, I turned my back on a ball got hit over my head, turned my back on it, made a deadbeat run to center field, and looked up and I couldn't see the ball. Sun was in my eyes. And so I backed up just a little bit. I saw it come down and made this unbelievable over my head catch. And, when I think about that last series, my last time playing, like that catch has remained with me. There was something kind of beautiful about, walking off into the sunset on my own terms, having a couple of my buddies in town to see it. We went out that next night. I think I went 2 for 4 or 3 for 4 the next night. They didn't call me up, and I called my agent and I said, I'm ready for a break. And I went and had a drink with my boys, and I told them, I was like, I don't know that I'm going to retire for sure, but my gut says that I've just played my last game. And for me, there's a beauty in it because you're going out on your own terms, Yeah,
and the beauty is obviously making that catch the day before you retire, and also the beautiful catch that you described in 2006 How fitting, and it's an ending that is to be proud. If you
Yeah.
transition to this, G, I think it's really interesting. A great question that we always ask is, what's next for Gary Matthews Jr.? What's going on with your life, and what's piques your interest moving forward?
Yeah. So really fortunate. My maternal grandfather was in commercial real estate, and so growing up, I not only had this impact, right, and tutelage from my father, but from my grandfather as well on the business side. And so he loved, purchasing raw land. He owned strip malls. I developed a love for architecture and design, and so in real estate. And so I own some coastal real estate properties that I rent out. Got a place in New York that I rent out, and then I'm also, part of that group of players that invest in, small business hotels. And so, these are things that I was familiar with at a really young age, right? I'd go to meetings with my grandfather. We'd sit down with banks and talk interest rates and hear about the different deals that he's got going on. As a kid, you don't understand the terminology that you're hearing, but it becomes familiar over time. And so I learned how to interact, with bankers at the time. This is the time. Now we do everything online, but
Right.
There was a time when you had to sit face to face with a banker and negotiate your interest rates and deals. And so I love real estate. I love architecture. And so I always say I do enough to stay busy and not enough to get in trouble. But I really love business. I love real estate. I love, the art of getting a deal done and searching for deals. And obviously as a player, you make a certain amount of money during your career. And I'm a guy who's been really hands-on in my portfolio. So I do a lot of research on finance, research on the stock market, and research on crypto and all the new things that are going on. I basically take all these things that I learned as a player, all these tools that I have to succeed, and applied them to my business life. And I've been really fortunate to make the transition from the game. But I had a lot of help, a lot of tools, and a lot of resources from players like you, right? Who were some people who really kind of, were good to me and gave me the truth and taught me about preparations. I mean, you had one of I argue it's the toughest position in all of sports, to come off of a bench, face a setup guy or a closer with a guy standing on second base or third base and have to have success doing it. You yourself have been one of the historical greats. And I know you've always been humble about it, but the numbers say different. The numbers say that you're one of the historical greats at something that is just notoriously difficult to do. And so I've taken, lessons from people like you and applied it to, what I do in some shape, form, or fashion. And I'm thankful for guys like you. I think it's important to give people their flowers while they're here instead of posting about them when something happens to them. So, Mark, thank you for your influence. Thank you for treating that young 23, 22-year-old version of me with respect, but also expectations of how I was to handle myself as a professional. I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
I appreciate the kind words too, G. I mean, this because you lived it from day one with your dad and all the experiences you shared today. This game is great because of the people that have influenced us in our careers. And we're just a part of the great game of baseball. So that's the beauty of this podcast. It also is the beauty of Gary Matthews Jr. and his particular story in the limelight of a very successful dad, but also, buddy, applying everything to the game of baseball and beyond. I think that is spectacular. So I appreciate the time that you gave us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love this game. And, one of the great aspects of this game as a former player now is to be able to share some of these stories and to hopefully not only share these stories with fans and give them some insight into some of these memories that they have about us as players, but also individuals, and to also impact this young generation players that are coming up. There's some great ones. When you look at Guerrero Jr., Tatis, and Dante Bichette's son, Bo Bichette. There's such a great wealth of talent who's coming up. The game, as we say, always moves on. And I just feel fortunate to have played a really small piece in the history of this game. It's really special.
Well, the game's better because you were in it. The game's better because your father was in it and because you pay attention to the history of the game. And I love your line there. Give them the flowers while they're still here. Giving people the credit they deserve before it's too late or you miss that opportunity. Staying busy and staying out of trouble. That's your mantra going forward, right?
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Yeah, this is a great opportunity to be on your platform and connect with fans, but also connect with friends and share some of these stories that fans may not have heard. It's really cool. Congratulations to both of you and wishing you guys continued success.
Thank you, Gary, and best to you as well. Gary Matthews Jr., our guest on this episode of Major League Beginnings. 12-year career in the big leagues with 7 different teams, 2006 All-Star. And I will remind folks again, get to YouTube, Google it, whatever is your methodology, and grab that catch from 2006 when he was with the Rangers. Arguably one of the best you will ever see. Gary, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, folks, thanks for checking out Major League Beginnings presented by Bet Online. And if you had as much fun as we did, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button anywhere you usually download your podcast from. You pick the platform, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, whatever you like. We're just glad to have you aboard. And we'll see you next time.